You cheated on me while I was on a business trip, didn't you? We're getting a divorce. Give the house to my parents and leave right now. Jackson's voice boomed through the phone, a storm of accusation and anger. But I wasn't taken aback. I knew he was grasping at straws, trying to find a reason to blame me for his own failings. I already sold it, I replied coolly, feeling his emotions teeter on the other end. He thought he could outwit me, but he underestimated my intuition. I simmered with fury initially, but his feeble attempt at deception only made me smirk. It was my turn now. This is the tale of how my deceitful husband tried to manipulate me and how I outmaneuvered him. My name is Olivia, a 28-year-old working mom. I've been at the college store job since I graduated from junior college at 20. Jackson, 2 years my senior, now toils away in an office at a construction firm. But when we first crossed paths 3 years ago, he was adrift, jobless. He'd abandoned his first post-college job, claiming it wasn't right for him. Since then, he drifted between gigs, often idling. That's when he swept me off my feet, proposing in mere months. Okay, but there's a condition, I stated firmly, noting the worry etched on Jackson's face. What is it? He asked, apprehension creeping into his voice. You need to find a stable job. Otherwise, marriage is out of the question. We need to think about our future, I explained, my tone resolute. Oh, come on. Of course, but you're working, so there's no rush, right? Jackson attempted to brush off the seriousness of the situation. My parents would worry if I married a man without a job. Find one before we get married, I insisted, my gaze unwavering. Seeing my stern expression, Jackson sighed in resignation. All right, I'll find one. Then you'll marry me. Yes, and so it'll be, I affirmed, though uncertainty lingered in my mind. Reluctantly, Jackson embarked on his job hunt, eventually securing a position in an office at a construction company. We tied the knot. Back then, I viewed Jackson as somewhat careless about money and work. He'd quit jobs impulsively and didn't always grasp the gravity of financial matters, even in the context of marriage. Yet he was receptive when I spoke seriously. I believed that after marriage, I could guide him, fill in his gaps, and in turn, he would complement my weaknesses. Together, we'd form a strong partnership. But life proved to be more complicated than I anticipated. Jackson's apparent disregard for financial matters appeared to be a trait passed down from his parents. Around a year into our marriage, during our search for a house and discussions about securing a mortgage, Jackson dropped a bombshell. I might not be able to get a loan, he disclosed casually, leaving me stunned. What? I exclaimed, seeking clarification. Nonchalantly, he explained, I looked into it, and because I hadn't been at my job for long, I might need a guarantor for the loan. The only person I could ask is my dad, but he's dealing with significant gambling debts, so he probably can't be a guarantor. His revelation left me dumbfounded, especially with the contract and the real estate agent right in front of us. Yet Jackson seemed unfazed. If we put the house in your name, it'll be fine, right? You've been at your job forever, so you can get the loan. We'll both pay it off. It's just a formality, he suggested casually. That's not the point. Why didn't you discuss this with me? This is a big deal for me too. I'm not even prepared with the paperwork, I retorted, frustration bubbling within me. Though he apologized, his contrition felt hollow, lacking sincerity. Despite my urge to argue, I refrained from escalating the situation, considering the already prepared contract and the presence of the agent. Reluctantly, I hastily gathered the necessary documents, such as my income statement, for the loan application. In a spur-of-the-moment decision, I impulsively bought the house under my name. As I hurried to finalize the paperwork, a wave of anxiety washed over me. Could I truly envision a future with this man? Perhaps I should have simply put a halt to the proceedings instead of rushing to prepare the documents. Adding to my mounting anxiety was the looming issue with my in-laws. The other day, I had a talk with Dad. Jackson began one evening. He mentioned that he might lose the house due to the debts I mentioned earlier. He's considering moving in with us. That's all right, isn't it? What? Why would you even consider that? I responded sharply, hoping to convey the seriousness of the situation, but Jackson seemed unfazed. Well, he's in a tough spot. My brother is single, but he's working overseas. I'm Dad's only option. Shouldn't we discuss this properly? Maybe he can stay with us temporarily until he finds another place, but committing to having him live with us permanently is a major decision, Jackson reasoned, his expression troubled. You're just trying to avoid the issue. If he stays, we can split the living expenses. You're always complaining about money, he countered. You mean the money you never contribute? You promised we'd split the mortgage, but it's only coming out of my paycheck. You haven't paid your share. In marriage, finances are shared. It's not just your money, it's ours. It's only deducted from your account because the house is in your name. Stop being so self-centered, I admonished, frustration simmering beneath my words. My frustration boiled over, and I raised my voice, demanding answers. Jackson's response was simply, "I hate talking about money," before abruptly leaving the room. These clashes became all too common, with Jackson consistently brushing off my concerns and retreating, leaving issues unresolved. Yet despite his aversion to discussing finances, Jackson wasn't entirely idle when it came to his family's predicaments. His role in construction site administration brought him into frequent contact with real estate contracts, leading him to consult a specific agency about the potential sale of his family home and the steps involved in securing the best deal. I've been considering selling the house for a good price, but I'm unsure about the process. What steps should I take if I decide to sell down the line? This topic was a recurring theme in our conversations. It was somewhat reassuring to know that I wasn't alone in contemplating these matters. However, the persistent notion of his family living with us post-sale always lingered in the back of my mind, causing unease. Jackson started holding meetings with real estate agencies and my parents-in-law behind my back, and his weekends away from home became more frequent. Eventually, he had to embark on a business trip that would keep him away for several months. The project required him to stay near the construction site until its completion. At the time, I didn't realize it, but the power struggle between us had already commenced. A few days after Jackson's departure, I decided to treat myself to tea after a shopping trip. As I entered the cafe, I was greeted by a familiar face. Recollecting past encounters, I recognized him as someone Jackson had once brought home. He worked at a real estate company, and Jackson had mentioned him as Samuel, a young employee who was relatively new to the company with less than a year under his belt. "Oh, hello. You've been to our house before, right?" I greeted him with a hint of recognition. "Yes, I apologize for dropping by unannounced and even staying for a meal." "My apologies," Samuel replied sheepishly. "No worries. I should have been more hospitable," I assured him, gesturing for us to sit down and have tea together. Samuel proved to be very friendly and surprisingly sensible, especially considering his youth. We engaged in pleasant conversation over tea before parting ways. At that moment, I could have fathomed what would follow. Little did I know, this seemingly innocuous encounter would later be twisted into an accusation of infidelity. It happened when Jackson confronted me. "You cheated on me while I was away, didn't you? We're getting a divorce. Give the house to my parents and leave now." His words hit me like a bolt of lightning. The first thought that crossed my mind was disbelief. Could it be true? Had Jackson spread rumors about me cheating, all to justify a divorce? The shocking revelation came from an unexpected source. Samuel, the very man Jackson falsely accused me of having an affair with. The day after our tea, Samuel showed up at my doorstep unannounced. I apologized for the sudden visit. "About yesterday, Jackson asked me to get close to you," he confessed, his words catching me off guard. Shocked and confused, I invited him inside and listened intently as he unraveled his tale. Jackson had orchestrated a deceitful plan to frame me for cheating in order to expedite a divorce. He had enlisted Samuel to manufacture evidence against me. There were two underlying motives behind Jackson's scheme. Firstly, he coveted our house and sought to wrest it from my possession. Concerned about his parents' property, he believed it would be simpler to reside there with them. However, my objection to the arrangement thwarted his plan, leading him to concoct a scheme to evict me and claim the house for himself. Secondly, Jackson was engaged in an extramarital affair. Under the guise of discussing matters with my parents-in-law, he spent weekends with his mistress. Consumed by his infatuation, he viewed me, his wife, as an impediment to his happiness. By framing me for infidelity, he aimed to secure financial compensation in the divorce settlement. I always underestimated Jackson's intelligence, but he certainly proved to be cunning in the worst ways. "Despicable," I muttered under my breath, my disdain evident. Samuel offered his apologies, but I had no intention of aiding Jackson in his deceitful scheme. I refused to be manipulated for such nefarious purposes. Thus, I feigned cooperation while secretly plotting to outmaneuver him. Taking advantage of Samuel's real estate expertise, I listened as he provided various suggestions. Eventually, he proposed a bold idea. You should sell the house while Jackson is away on his trip. When I finally uttered the words, I sold it, Jackson's reaction was a mixture of confusion and disbelief. What? He managed to sputter, clearly at a loss for words. Seeing his stunned expression, I resolved to twist the knife further. I recounted everything I learned from Samuel, including the recordings he provided. You were attempting to fabricate evidence to make it appear as though I was having an affair with him. If we divorce now, I can pursue alimony and court proceedings, I explained calmly, watching Jackson's bewildered expression as he repeated, Why? Why? But I had another revelation to share. You might not have realized, but Samuel isn't just an ordinary employee. He's actually the son of the company's CEO. Jackson's shock was palpable. What? How could I have missed that? He exclaimed, his confusion deepening. It was clear he had underestimated the gravity of the situation. Do you not realize that Samuel shares the same last name as the CEO? How could you overlook that? I questioned, incredulous at his obliviousness. Well, Samuel's last name isn't exactly rare, Jackson attempted to defend himself weakly. Wait, are you serious? He added, his incredulity growing. No, I'm serious, I asserted firmly, noting the shock in Jackson's expression. Samuel's company held significant importance to Jackson as one of his key clients. Additionally, they had provided crucial assistance with his family home matters. If news of his deceit reached the company's boss, Jackson would undoubtedly find himself in serious trouble. As it turned out, Samuel had already reported the situation. Hey, come on. All right, I'll look into it. If you're lying, I'll find out soon enough, Jackson responded before abruptly ending the call. It didn't take long for him to realize the gravity of the situation and the irreversible damage he had caused. Subsequently, the real estate company owned by Samuel's father refused to engage in any business dealings with Jackson or offer him advice regarding his family home. With no other options, Jackson was forced to return to his family home after concluding his business trip. Meanwhile, since I had sold my house, Samuel had graciously introduced me to an affordable apartment, leaving me with no concerns. As I initiated the divorce proceedings, Jackson persistently reached out, pleading for forgiveness. I'm sorry, Olivia. Please forgive me, he implored. It's too late now. You attempted to manipulate someone into trapping me. Why should I believe anything you say? I retorted, my resolve unyielding. Don't say that. Once we're divorced, you can marry that other woman, right? That's what you wanted, isn't it? I questioned, hoping to reaffirm his intentions. Yes, but she apparently had someone else she liked and dumped me. What a pathetic story, Jackson admitted with a hint of bitterness. Even if that's the case, don't expect me to welcome you back with open arms, I responded firmly, my patience wearing thin. With a sigh, I ended the call. Despite my efforts to keep my current address undisclosed, Jackson's relentless barrage of calls persisted. Each time, he'd plead, Don't leave me. Help me, I'll be a good husband, his promises ringing hollow in my ears. I grew increasingly exasperated with his empty pleas. Once the divorce was finalized, I resolved to sever all ties, deleting his number, blocking him on WhatsApp, and cutting off communication entirely. Yet, the unwelcome appeals didn't end with Jackson. Even my mother-in-law reached out, begging, Please, Olivia, we'll be lost without you. It's not the house we wanted, it's you, isn't it? But there's no house left, I pointed out, feeling a mix of frustration and disbelief. We didn't just desire the house. We're not that heartless. Come back, and you'll understand, she urged, her tone pleading. You were after the money, weren't you? I accused, feeling the surge of resentment. That's not true. You're being unfair. You tried to pressure me into living with you, and when I refused, Jackson attempted to manipulate me to gain an advantage in the divorce, she countered defensively. I can't trust someone like that. It's evident that your motives revolve around money, I asserted firmly, refusing to yield to Jackson's pleas. As I continued to reject his advances, my father-in-law dialed my number, his tone dripping with arrogance. Isn't it your duty as a daughter-in-law to show some respect to my wife? Are you seriously saying no? Isn't this all because of the debt you accumulated? He demanded, his voice growing increasingly strident. With each word, his accusations stung, and when I responded with equal resolve, his tone turned venomous. "You heartless woman, abandoning your mother-in-law in her time of need and shifting blame onto her. I'll make you pay for your cruelty," he bellowed into the phone, the volume causing my ears to ring. Unable to tolerate his threats any longer, I abruptly ended the call and, clutching the recorded audio as evidence, sought counsel from my lawyer. It transpired that my father-in-law's menacing words could be construed as a threat. Armed with this knowledge, I informed Jackson that I would pursue legal action if he refused to consent to the divorce. In a state of panic, Jackson reluctantly agreed to the divorce, allowing me to sever ties with his tumultuous family once and for all. With the legal proceedings finalized, I found solace in the newfound freedom from their oppressive influence. However, the consequences of his actions soon caught up with Jackson. His reputation at work suffered, resulting in diminished responsibilities and a significant loss of trust from his superiors. Furthermore, the unresolved debt issue forced him to sell his family home at a depreciated value, leaving him and his parents to reside in a modest apartment. With his reduced role at work, Jackson's income dwindled, compounded by the financial strain of providing support to his dependent parents. The burden of alimony payments only exacerbated his financial woes. These unfortunate circumstances came to my attention through Samuel, who remained confident despite the tumultuous events. It was through Samuel's suggestion that I found a potential opportunity to leverage my customer service skills from my previous job at a clothing store. He proposed a position in his company's HR department, offering a chance for me to rebuild my life on my own terms. After discovering an opening that required strong communication skills, I deliberated extensively and sought advice before ultimately accepting the position at the real estate company. This decision marked a significant shift in my career path. Throughout this transition, Samuel and I maintained our close bond, which gradually blossomed into a romantic relationship. A year into our courtship, we exchanged vows and embarked on our journey as husband and wife, with me assuming the role of the future company president's spouse. The irony wasn't lost on me. The two individuals Jackson attempted to portray as entangled in an affair had ultimately found love and married each other. As I integrated into my new family, which included my in-laws, I was met with warmth and acceptance. Together with Samuel, I envisioned crafting a fulfilling and harmonious life, building upon the foundation of our shared love and mutual respect.
"Listen, you need to move out. We've decided to stay in this house." "What?" "It's too crowded for us newly married couple to have everyone here, and this isn't even your house. If you don't like it, find your own place. Sophie can stay here if she wants. Kicking her out is unfair." My mom's words made me feel relieved, but my brother and his wife were still unhappy. This happened 5 years ago when my younger brother, right out of college, brought his girlfriend home and said he wanted to marry her. My name is Sophie. I'm 33 now, and my brother, who's 5 years younger, got married right after college. His wife was still in college, 3 years behind him. My brother and his wife really wanted to tie the knot right away, but our parents suggested waiting until she finished college. Oddly enough, her parents didn't mind either way. It seems like she's a carefree spender, and her folks just want her out of the house as soon as possible. "We'll cover her tuition today, but after that, she's your responsibility. So anything other than her education isn't our concern," they said casually, not wanting to bother with rent. The newlyweds chose to stay with our parents. Thankfully, our dad, who used to be well off, owned a spacious old house. With enough space, it wasn't a big deal for them to live together. My dad grew up in a wealthy family, so he never faced money troubles like a regular worker. He hardly shared his thoughts, always wearing a smile and seeming a bit out of touch with reality. Mom often guided him, but I never saw him lose his temper. "I got a talking to from your mom again," he'd say with a chuckle. Dad was easygoing, taking everything in stride, which is probably why he and Mom got along so well. I adored Dad. He'd just laugh along when Mom scolded him. And so began the living arrangement with a newly married couple. My sister-in-law doesn't lift a finger around the house. She doesn't even bother with the vacuum or sorting her laundry from ours. Cooking? Forget about it. She waits for Mom or me to make meals. "You could pitch in a bit, you know." I finally snapped, only to be accused of picking on her. "You're intimidating, sis. Maybe that's why you're still single at your age," she quipped, giggling. My brother just joins in her laughter. "At least do your own laundry. Isn't it embarrassing to have someone else wash your underwear, sis?" I thought we were all one big happy family. She'd fake tears for sympathy. My brother always took her side in moments like these. Sophie, just because Emily is young and cute, don't get jealous and bully her. We're not here to be your servants. Living together means following some rules. Emily's a student, her main focus should be on her studies. We're family, so we should be able to cooperate, right? He said this without any hint of remorse. Even though Mom suggested they get their own place and help us with rent, he brushed it off. If we move out, it has to be a fancy apartment. We can't settle for something cheap, such selfishness. When I asked Dad to intervene, all he'd say is, it's tough for just the two of them to manage. They're still young. And because of that, my brother and his wife felt even bolder. When I hit 30, I got engaged, and it was a stroke of luck. My future husband was a client from work, and we hit it off during meetings. He was thoughtful and kind, so when he asked me out and then proposed, I was over the moon. Finally tying the knot, surprised someone would want you. Better make sure you don't mess it up, my brother remarked. Glad you found a buyer. Can't wait for the busybody sister-in-law to be out of our hair. My parents chimed in, blessing our union wholeheartedly. I'd visit my parents occasionally, but my brother and his wife hadn't changed. She graduated the next year, but didn't work or help around the house. When I tried to advise her, I was told I was a stranger now and shouldn't meddle. But I had a feeling they weren't leaving because they wanted to keep hold of the family assets. Deep down, they were probably relieved they didn't have to share them with me, now that I was married and gone. However, leaving doesn't mean I forfeited my rights to inherit. My brother and his wife probably understand this, but now that I'm not around, they might feel they can do as they please. When the time comes, I'd gladly give up my inheritance if they take good care of our parents and the house. But for now, I don't see any signs of that happening. About 2 years later, my father's health deteriorated, and he was in and out of the hospital. I pitched in with his care, visiting him as often as I could, but my brother and his wife seemed unconcerned. My father started mentioning his $20 million inheritance, and every time I visited, I noticed my sister-in-law sweet-talking on my father's side, saying, "Hey sis, I'd love to help out too, but Mom handles everything, and I never get the chance."
But you never showed interest in that before, did you? That's not entirely true, but don't you think Mom might be trying to keep us out of the loop to control the inheritance? Our parents are really close, and I think Mom wants to handle everything herself. I don't think she's thinking about it that way. Really? So you believe we'll get a fair share when Dad passes? Stop it. Don't talk about such unlucky things. Dad's still with us. I'm really frustrated with my brother and his wife, who seem to only care about money. But it's unclear if my father actually has that much wealth. While her family used to be well off, my father is just a regular salaryman. I can't imagine he has that much saved up. A year later, my father passed away. I hurried to the hospital as soon as I heard his condition had worsened suddenly. But when I arrived, he was already gone. The only solace was seeing how peaceful his face looked. I'm sure he was smiling, being looked after by Mom until the end. You're smiling, right, Dad? You were carefree till the very end. My husband left work early to join me, but my brother and his wife didn't show up at the hospital. When I reached out to my brother, he calmly responded, "If he's already gone, what's the point of rushing there?" My brother and his wife didn't seem to be grieving at the funeral. They were laughing and chatting. Right after the funeral, my brother wasted no time bringing up the topic of inheritance. As a couple, we'll inherit the $20 million from Dad. What? What do you mean? Did both you and Mom give up your shares? Can't we discuss this after the 49th day memorial? The funeral just happened today. Normally, it's better to settle financial matters later. We live in his house as a couple, and I'm the eldest son, so the inheritance is rightfully ours. Bringing this up right after Dad's passing didn't sit well with me. I didn't particularly care about the money, but it angered me that my brother assumed I'd agree with him. Fine, but in return you better take good care of Mom. Who would believe such words? My mother spoke before I could object. It's fine, dear. Arguing about this won't do any good, especially now. But Dad had just passed and Mom was clearly feeling down. I couldn't just let it slide. This isn't something to decide right now. Let's head home for today, my husband, who had been quietly listening, intervened. I held back until now, but my husband couldn't stand it any longer. That's when we decided to leave. It doesn't feel right, especially after Dad's passing.
I understand your feelings, but right now, I'm more worried about your mom. She's usually so strong, but she seems really down. I'm really worried about her too. I couldn't help but wonder why Mom agreed with my brother's stance so easily. Was she swayed by him and his wife? Mom and Dad were always a strong couple. Losing Dad must have hit her hard. Honestly, I'd rather be reminiscing about Dad right now. But my anger towards my brother is clouding everything. Since then, my brother and his wife kept bringing up renouncing the inheritance, but I refused to discuss it until after the 49th day. When the time came, they wasted no time bringing it up again. But once more, Mom urged me to give it up. If Mom says it's okay, then it must be okay, right? Are you sure about this? Won't you regret it later on? After all, Emily is Dad's daughter, so don't worry. Well, yeah, she's your wife. That's not what I meant. I meant she has a right to inherit. At this point, Emily's practically been adopted by our parents. What? I was stunned. When I glanced at Mom, she simply nodded. Adoption by in-laws isn't exactly unheard of, right? It's not common for a bride to be adopted, especially not a son-in-law. If Emily inherits, we'll pay less in inheritance tax than if I were the sole heir. I was shocked that he had thought about it so deeply, wondering when he started planning this. Even more surprising was that Mom agreed. And then they asked me to renounce the inheritance. Maybe Mom, being a mother now that Dad's gone, was worried about the future. But if it's Mom's decision, I suppose I can't argue. So I decided to send in the inheritance renunciation document. I don't want to argue about money anymore. Luckily, my husband isn't one to fuss over it, and he trusts me to make the decision about the inheritance. If renouncing it means Mom can live peacefully from now on, then it's the best choice. About a month later, my sister-in-law called me. It looks like your mom is losing her memory. What? But she's always been so tidy. The house must be a disaster if she's not cleaning. It was hard to believe my mom, who was usually meticulous about cleanliness, could leave laundry lying around and not bother to clean. And after she's just eaten, she yells at me, "I'm hungry. Are you trying to starve me? Can you imagine?" And I'm the one cooking for her. She's turned into a completely different person. Is it true? Have you taken her to the hospital? It seems unbelievable. She gets aggressive when I try to get her out, and it's embarrassing to be seen with her in public. Sam thinks I should just let her be, but I'm the one dealing with her all day, and I'm at my wit's end. Honestly, I'm tired of it. So I decided to stop by my parents' house on my way home from work. I was speechless at the sight of my mother, who looked unrecognizable. She was sitting on her bed in dirty pajamas, hair unkempt, with vacant eyes. It's only been a month, but she's changed so much. It's clear she's not herself. Mom, you know who I am, right? What's happened to you? Who are you? My mother asked, tilting her head. This can't be real. I mean, look at her. She should be sitting, right? What's happening? And the room is a mess. How did it get this bad? Well, I don't know about all that, but you guys promised to look after Mom, didn't you? Taking care of an elderly woman isn't part of the agreement. There's no written contract when it comes to caring for parents. What are you talking about? In that case, dear sister-in-law, it's your turn to take care of her. I was going to do that without being asked. Let's go home, Mom, I said, attempting to lead her. But she stubbornly resisted. She wouldn't budge, shaking off my hand. Even when I tried to pull her, she clung to the bed, refusing to move. What's happened to you, Mom? I had no choice but to back off that day. Even when my husband and I returned the next day to fetch her, she still adamantly refused to move. I want to be with your father, she cried. It was hard to believe my mother had become like this. I have a job and can't visit her every day. That's why I want her to come to my house. But she refused to leave her old home. Sometime later, I received a call from my younger brother. Sis, we've moved. Really? Where to? Did you take Mom with you? I wouldn't drag around an elderly woman. She's just a burden. Sam, what's wrong with you? Mom mentioned Dad's valuable securities are in the safe deposit box. If we sell the house, we'll get around $20 million. What? It'll be a problem if Mom stays in that house forever. So sis, get Mom out of there as soon as possible. I'm relying on you. Wait, hold on. What are you saying? So that's the situation. Please take care of mother-in-law. As soon as my sister-in-law, who seemed to have taken over my brother's role, made that statement, the phone abruptly went dead. Despite repeatedly dialing, they didn't pick up. I left work early and rushed to my parents' house to persuade my mother to come to my place. I anticipated her usual resistance, but this time she quietly agreed, which was a relief. It seemed like Mom understood that nobody was staying in that house anymore. She remained silent during the drive home. But when we arrived, she suddenly perked up. "Huh? Can I use your bathroom?" she asked and hurried inside. I was perplexed and stood there, trying to make sense of it. The mother I just saw was unmistakably the same as before. What in the world is going on? I felt like I'd been struck by lightning. When my mother emerged from the bath, she requested some clothes. I quickly fetched her some of my own and a fresh set of underwear I bought for her. "Ah, I feel so refreshed," she exclaimed with a bright smile, drying her hair with a towel. "Mom, what's happening?" I asked, just as my husband walked in. Like me, he looked stunned at the sight of my mother. Suddenly, my mother burst into laughter. "That was quite the performance, wasn't it? I used to be in the drama club in high school. They say to deceive the enemy, you must first deceive your allies, and it seems to be true, doesn't it?" So it turned out my mother was feigning senility. But why? I couldn't make sense of any of it. "Just wait and see. That couple will do something worse soon." By that couple, do you mean Sam and his wife? Exactly. That couple's relationship is solely built on money. Then my mother proceeded to fill us in on what had transpired. Both my husband and I were amazed by my mother's cunning. The following week, my brother called, furious. "Hey sis, you knew about this and didn't say anything, did you? What's going on? What are you suddenly talking about? There's no inheritance from Dad at all. When I checked the safety deposit box Mom mentioned, there were only loan agreements inside. So remember that $20 million? Well, that's actually a $20 million debt. Did you not bother to check? Typical of you, the only son in our family to inherit all of Dad's debts." Well, technically, that's still part of the inheritance. In the past, Dad, being too trusting, had acted as a guarantor for a friend's business without Mom's knowledge. The business failed, and the friend kept borrowing from Dad until it went bankrupt, leaving behind only the debt. And to make matters worse, the friend disappeared without a trace. It turns out that our family home had been put up as collateral due to the debt incurred back then. This might have even contributed to Dad developing dementia. It was only then that Mom found out about it. Dad kept saying there's a $20 million inheritance. Dad's words led my younger brother to mistakenly believe there was a hefty cash inheritance. So he and his wife decided to move in with our parents to seize as much money as possible. Dad, without suspecting anything, agreed to my brother's plan. But Mom saw through my brother's scheme and chose not to object. She knew he was so eager for the inheritance that she could simply hand it over to him. To shield Dad's dementia, Mom deliberately kept my brother and his wife away from him. And after Dad's passing, when my brother and his wife finally showed their true intentions, Mom pretended not to notice to observe their reaction. She bided her time for the right moment. "Then I'll renounce the inheritance too." "It's too late for that. Did you know you can only renounce an inheritance within 3 months of learning about it? We're well past that period now, so you two will have to shoulder the debt together." Mom had been waiting for this moment. She feigned senility until the deadline for renouncing the inheritance had passed. My brother's only goal in living with Mom was to extract information about Dad's inheritance. When the time came, Mom casually mentioned the safety deposit box as if it had just occurred to her. With the information they needed, my brother and his wife swiftly left the house. All along, they had been playing into Mom's hands. Emily is threatening divorce if she doesn't get any money. But legally, she's Dad's child, so she can't escape the debt even with a divorce, right? I see, but I quit my job, thinking I could live a life of luxury with $20 million. But I don't have that kind of money. Oh dear, you've really gotten yourself into a mess, haven't you? So, naturally you'll help me out, right? Why should I help you? You're the one who pushed Mom and me to renounce the inheritance, so I shouldn't be involved anymore. Well, thanks to you, I'm in this mess. I'm sure Dad is crying tears of joy to have such a dutiful son. Good luck paying back the debt. The family home was seized due to the mortgage, leaving the land and house, worth nearly $720,000, insufficient to cover the debt. My brother and his wife struggled to make repayments while their marriage suffered under the strain of financial stress. As Mom predicted, they eventually divorced, consumed by constant money disputes. Mom agreed to dissolve the adoption, making Emily a stranger to us. She likely hoped this would absolve her of the debt, but reality is unforgiving. Despite the dissolution, Emily still inherited the debt from her father's passing. "You deceived me." My sister-in-law stormed in, her anger palpable. However, we hadn't intended to deceive her. Mom was heartbroken to see my brother and his wife happily calculating money instead of mourning their father's death. She remained silent, overwhelmed by their greed. Their behavior served as a cautionary tale of the consequences of unchecked greed. Afterward, my brother continued to pester us for money, prompting us to relocate without informing him. To my surprise, I discovered that Dad had taken out a substantial life insurance policy with Mom and me as beneficiaries. Despite his passing, he had diligently kept up with the premiums. The fact that my brother wasn't listed as a beneficiary left me questioning whether Dad had been aware of the situation all along. Despite his seemingly carefree demeanor, perhaps the true strategist in our family wasn't Mom, but Dad. He had once murmured, "There's a $20 million inheritance. Whether intentional or not, I can't say for certain now." My husband and I used the insurance payout as a down payment on a new home. Meanwhile, my brother and his ex-wife seemed to be working while dealing with pressure from loan sharks. Their troubles were no longer my concern. Even after our move, my brother persisted in contacting us, demanding to know our whereabouts. That's when I mentioned the insurance money. "You renounced the inheritance, so that money should be mine," he shouted. However, inheritance renouncement and life insurance are distinct matters. Unlike inheritance, life insurance payouts go directly to the named beneficiary. I explained this to him and promptly blocked my brother and former sister-in-law's contact details. Now we're enjoying a peaceful life as a family of 3. Mom is thriving both physically and mentally, the epitome of good health. My husband and I pray that she continues to live a long and fulfilling life.
My name is Maria Dalton, and I'm about to turn 27. I've been married for 5 years and have a 4-year-old son named Martin. At first, I worked full-time, but now I work part-time at the same company. My husband is 30 years old, 3 years older than me. Kevin Carlton, who I married, seemed sweet when we were dating, but things changed after marriage. He became more controlling. Kevin has a 20-year-old sister named Jane Dalton, and he spoils her a lot, maybe because of their big age gap. Before we got married, I didn't really mind how close Jane and Kevin were. But after tying the knot, I started noticing some changes. Jane frequently drops by our place, and I end up scrambling to cater to her every whim because Kevin always caves into her demands. She shows up unannounced, morning or night, without bringing any gifts or even a thank you. She acts like I'm invisible, only talking to Kevin, saying, "Hey brother, I'm here again." Kevin, oblivious to the fact that I didn't prepare dinner for Jane, asks if she wants to eat. When I try to discreetly mention it to Kevin, he brushes it off, leaving me to serve my own dinner to Jane in the end. Then, loud enough for Jane to hear, he blames me, saying things like, "You should have made more food." Jane looks like she's going to cry and apologizes to me. Kevin comforts her and scolds me, saying things like, "You're not considerate," or "Don't be mean to my sister." Even though Jane apologizes, it's clear she feels reassured by how Kevin takes her side. It's like she enjoys it. I end up making my own meal from leftovers while they eat together. Just as I'm about to join them, Jane tells Kevin she wants to talk alone. Kevin moves me and Martin to another room. This isn't the first time. After we finish eating and clean up, I find them chatting on the sofa. They never bothered to clean up after themselves. It feels like they see me as a maid, not a wife or sister-in-law. They don't even talk to Martin. It's like I'm just a maid bringing my kid to work. I was tidying up the kitchen and getting ready to bathe Martin when Kevin suddenly called me, even though it was almost 8 p.m. He said, "Jane wants cake. Go buy it now. Get it from the shop by the station," telling me exactly where to go. But going out to buy cake would make Martin go to bed late. When I hesitated, Jane insisted, "I want it now," and Kevin rushed me, saying, "It's fine if he stays up a bit longer tonight." Then Kevin started yelling at me, blaming me for having an attitude with Jane around. I knew I'd have to go to the cake shop eventually, so I reluctantly agreed. There's a cake shop near the station that closes at 9 p.m. So if I hurry, I can make it.
As I was getting ready to go, I overheard them talking, speaking loudly enough for me to hear. They were saying things like, "She's so thoughtless," and "Why did you marry her?" Since I couldn't leave Martin alone, I decided to take him with me. While I was getting Martin ready, I heard Kevin's loud voice from the living room. "If you defy me again, we'll get a divorce." Martin could hear it too. He might not understand the words, but I think he knows his parents are fighting. Trying to control my emotions, I asked Martin, "What kind of cake would you like?" He perked up and said, "Mom, I want a cake with lots of fruits." So on our way to the cake shop, we chatted about cakes, momentarily forgetting about Kevin's words. We made it to the cake shop just before it closed. Luckily, they had the cake Jane wanted. We bought 2 cakes and the fruit-loaded cake Martin desired. When we got back home, I served the cakes to Jane and Kevin. I prepared Martin's cake and brought it to the dining room. As soon as I set it down in front of Martin, Jane pointed at it and said, "Actually, I want that cake." Before I could respond, Kevin moved Martin's cake in front of Jane. Ignoring Martin's protests, Jane started eating his cake. Kevin justified it by saying, "I bought that cake with my money, so I get to choose." Unable to contain my emotions any longer, I expressed my frustration to Kevin and Jane. Kevin then threatened, "We could get a divorce, you know." Martin stopped crying but held my hand tightly, looking worried. Then, after a moment, Martin said, "Mom, I also love cake with strawberries. It's really yummy." He mentioned it while eating the cake that Jane initially wanted. I feel like I'm putting Martin through too much. 3 adults, myself included, shouldn't be subjecting a 4-year-old child to this. When I saw Jane reaching for Martin's cake, I swiftly moved his plate away. Martin happily followed me to another room, saying, "Yummy, let's go over here." Probably Kevin noticed Jane's attempt too. He apologized to her, saying, "Sorry for being so tight-fisted." I wanted to respond, but I held back, not wanting to expose Martin to the word divorce. Seeing Martin innocently enjoying his cake is heartwarming. After he finished, ignoring Kevin and Jane, we decided to have a late bath and sleep in Martin's bed. The next morning, I woke up to find Jane had already left. I was about to wake up Kevin and Martin and make breakfast when I heard Martin crying. I rushed to him to find his piggy bank, a gift from my father, broken, and all his saved money gone. It was Martin's nightly ritual to bid goodnight to his piggy bank before going to sleep. Last night was no exception. He said goodnight to it and cuddled up with me. At that time, only Kevin and Jane were in the living room. I asked Kevin about the piggy bank. He responded casually, saying that Jane needed some money, so she took it from Martin's piggy bank. Martin was still crying as I held him close. His pain was so palpable that it brought tears to my eyes. It was agonizing to see Kevin prioritize and cater to his sister Jane over our son Martin. Anger and sadness flooded over me simultaneously. "Why are you making a morning so miserable?" Kevin retorted. "Don't you think you did something wrong? Martin is crying so much." For the first time since we got married, I let my anger out towards him. I had always avoided arguing in front of Martin, but I couldn't stay silent seeing him so hurt. Kevin looked at me intensely, then went to the bedroom without saying a word, returning with something in his hand. To my shock, Kevin handed me divorce papers, something I didn't even know he had stashed away. "If you're not happy with me, then let's get a divorce," he declared, thrusting the papers at me before storming out of the house with a loud slam of the door. Martin, who had never shed tears over the issues with Kevin and Jane, seemed to have reached his breaking point. He had been crying since last night, and it broke my heart to see him in such pain. "Hey Martin, how about we skip daycare today?" I suggested, hoping to bring him some comfort. He eagerly agreed with a loud yes, flashing me a faint smile. As Martin brought a picture book from the shelf and settled onto my lap, he looked up at me with joy and asked, "Today, Mama is the teacher at daycare, right?" His innocence was like a ray of sunshine. I couldn't help but marvel at his resilience. Today, I decided that we would spend the day playing and cherishing each moment together to fill his heart with happiness. I might be causing some inconvenience at work, but when I explained the situation, they kindly granted me a day off, advising me to spend quality time with Martin. In the morning, we headed to the park, played games like hide and seek, and had a blast on the swings and slides. Upon returning home for lunch, Martin seemed tired and soon dozed off on my lap, just like he used to when he was a baby. Normally, I would use this time to catch up on chores. But today felt different. so I decided to cherish the moment and enjoy watching him sleep peacefully. As I started to drift off myself, I was startled by a noise from the front door. It was too early for Kevin to be back, so I felt uneasy. Quickly, I scooped up Martin, and grabbing only my bag with essentials, I hurriedly hid with him in the bedroom closet. I froze as I sensed someone entering the house, holding my breath as I heard a familiar voice. The person seemed to be searching for something, muttering, "I can't find it." Where did the wife hide it? Fear gripped me as I listened to the sound of rummaging, but as I focused on the voice, I recognized it. It was Jane. Questions flooded my mind. Why did she have a key? What was she searching for? I cautiously cracked open the closet door to see what she was up to. She was rifling through drawers and cabinets, then let out a frustrated sigh before making a phone call. "I searched where you said, but it's not there." "Yeah, I checked there too. If it's not there, it's a waste of time." "Okay, got it. Heading home now," she said, mentioning Kevin's name. Kevin? I wondered what they were searching for. I heard the front door lock, and when it was safe, I put Martin to bed and pondered the strange events. I was certain Kevin was involved in whatever they were looking for. If they were searching for something unknown, could it be one of my possessions? Despite their earlier conversation, I couldn't decipher why Jane had suddenly appeared at our house. Kevin felt like a stranger to me, and I was overcome with a mix of disgust and fear towards him. Hastily, I packed the essentials for Martin and myself. By the time Martin woke from his nap, I was ready to leave. "Martin, let's go to Grandpa's house," I said, and we made our way to the station, catching a train to my parents' home. Thankfully, it was just 2 stops away, so we arrived swiftly. Since I hadn't informed them beforehand, my parents were surprised, but they sensed something was wrong and welcomed us without prying. Their dog, a favorite of Martin's, greeted him eagerly, and they began playing together. Watching them, I felt a sense of relief and proceeded to recount everything that had happened with Kevin and Jane. "Perhaps Jane was searching for your bank cards," my mother suggested. It made sense. Before getting married, I had founded a successful online shop for handmade goods with friends. As the CEO of the handmade industry, I gained recognition, but when the shop flourished, I decided to focus on raising my child. I've entrusted my company to trusted friends while I focus on raising my child. I work part-time and handle most tasks from home. Though I'm still the CEO, Kevin is unaware of this. He knows about my previous role and likely suspects I have savings. I've informed him that I receive assistance from the company but left out the CEO details, letting him assume I stepped down. I haven't disclosed the full extent of my CEO position or savings to Kevin for a reason. Shortly after our marriage, I discovered his poor money management skills. He spends everything he earns. He allocates only $200 monthly for food expenses and suggested I quit my job to be a full-time housewife, an idea I never agreed to given the financial strain of such a small allowance. After some persuasion, he reluctantly agreed to let me work part-time at my current company. To ensure I wouldn't consider divorce, he even had me sign a post-marital property waiver with a lawyer. Since Martin's birth, I've been allotted only $200 for food expenses. Consequently, I've been using my savings to cover Martin's nursery fees and clothing expenses. I've refrained from asking Kevin for money beyond the food budget, leading him to assume I have substantial savings. Jane appears to be in dire need of money, and with Kevin's belief in my savings, they may be searching for my cash cards. It all makes sense now. I maintain a separate savings account dedicated to slowly accumulating funds for Martin's future. A portion of my salary is automatically deposited into this account each month. Given their financial circumstances, it's highly likely they are seeking my cash cards. No matter how hard Jane or Kevin search, they won't find my valuables because I always keep them close, including my cash cards. However, there's still an unresolved issue. Jane might be entering our house even when we're not there, possibly with Kevin's knowledge. Following my father's advice, I decided to store my valuables in my parents' safe. Why are they so desperate for money? As I pondered this question, Martin tearfully approached my father, explaining that his piggy bank had been broken, and he couldn't keep his promise to save up. My father's face flushed with anger upon hearing Martin's story. "I'll call Kevin and talk to him," my mother suggested. While chiding my father, "Let's find out their motives." She reasoned that since Kevin had mentioned divorce, he might try to blame us and make the divorce more favorable for himself. Therefore, It's essential to calmly uncover their motives now to prevent them from escaping with excuses later on. I decided to secretly record their conversation to uncover their motives. My parents suggested consulting a lawyer who was a longtime family friend. Once back home, I started cooking dinner as usual when Kevin returned. I discreetly began recording on my phone, keeping the screen face down to avoid detection. To my surprise, Kevin immediately asked me where I kept my cash cards. When I questioned his sudden interest, he provided vague answers, attempting to deceive me. Remaining silent, I watched as Kevin's demeanor shifted to one of numbness and sadness. "Give me all your part-time earnings for my sister," he demanded, but I refused, explaining that the money was for Martin's savings. This enraged Kevin, who then angrily pushed divorce papers toward me from his bag. "You're relying on my money, so don't defy me," he retorted, dismissing the importance of saving for Martin. His words implied a greater value placed on Jane over Martin, leaving me stunned and disheartened. Upon hearing Kevin's words, I halted my meal preparations, calmly placed the divorce papers into the bag I had prepared earlier, and grasped Martin's hand, leading him to the door. Kevin's voice boomed behind us, declaring, "I'm serious about the divorce. Don't ever return." In response, I asserted, "I won't return to a home where anyone can come and go as they please," before departing. Was it too harsh to label my sister-in-law as a stranger? Following my departure, I was bombarded with messages and calls from Kevin, all of which I chose to ignore. I powered off my phone and sought refuge at my parents' house. There, I played the recording of Kevin's conversation and showed them the completed divorce papers. My parents simply advised, "Do as you see fit." I didn't harbor any love or affection for Kevin, but I still cared deeply for Martin. Some advised me to divorce Kevin to spare Martin's feelings, but I feared that divorcing could also hurt Martin. Amidst this inner turmoil, Martin voiced his hunger, prompting my mother to whip up his favorite dish, hamburgers. Tears welled up in my eyes as my mother, with a gentle smile, said to Martin, "I made these hamburgers so you and Mom can visit us anytime." After taking a bite, Martin beamed and exclaimed, "Grandma's hamburgers are the best. I want them every day," his joyful words tugging on heartstrings. I replied, "It's because these hamburgers are made with all the love I have for you," as he sweetly fed me a bite. Overwhelmed by his kindness, tears streamed down my cheeks uncontrollably. I tried to suppress them, but they kept flowing. My father reassured Martin, who was alarmed by my tears, saying, "Mommy is crying because she's so happy you gave her this hamburger." "These are tears of joy, not sadness," he explained tenderly. Martin, in his innocence, remarked, "This hamburger is so yummy. If Jane were here, she'd love it too." Hearing this, I couldn't hold back my tears, and I embraced him tightly, while my father's eyes filled with emotion. Turning to Martin, I said, "Being with family is a blessing, isn't it?" He looked puzzled and asked, "Didn't Dad say only Jane is family? Is my family just Mom, Grandpa, and Grandma?" My father responded gently, "Yes, that's right," then asked Martin, "Would you like to stay here with us as family?" Martin chuckled and replied, "Of course. We're family, bringing smiles to everyone's faces." When was the last time we had such a natural meal? When did we last enjoy a meal filled with endless laughter and conversation? Despite contemplating divorce, the happiness of this meal persuaded me to finally part ways with Kevin. I planned to break the news to Martin, though the thought weighed heavily on my heart. Surprisingly, Martin seemed to understand and embrace the idea of divorce, expressing, "We'll still be a family." He happily cuddled our pet dog, affectionately referring to him as his little brother, despite the dog being older. With resolve, I began preparations for the divorce. Firstly, I promptly contacted a lawyer who was a friend of my father, arranging to meet the following day. That night, Martin slept with my father and the dog, their faint laughter bringing me comfort as I lay in bed with my mother, reminiscing about my childhood. The next morning, upon checking my smartphone, I found over 200 missed calls and messages from Kevin, reflecting his emotional turmoil. Just the sight of it drained me, prompting me to switch off my phone once more. Today, I met with the lawyer, discussing the details and confirming my decision to divorce. We finalized the paperwork, and the lawyer will meet with Kevin tomorrow to proceed. After some time, the lawyer visited my parents' house to discuss the situation. It turned out that Jane had accrued a substantial debt from gambling and excessive shopping, with Kevin serving as her guarantor. When Jane couldn't make the repayments, they devised a plan to tap into my savings. Now, Kevin wants me and Martin back and is retracting his desire for a divorce, the lawyer explained. However, the divorce papers I had submitted earlier had already been processed. When asked if this meant the divorce was finalized, the lawyer confirmed it, stating, "Yes, it's been accepted." Kevin appeared to break down, expressing his fear of losing me to another man. Despite his emotional plea, knowing that everything was settled brought me a sense of peace. I anticipated arguments over child support, but Kevin even pledged to pay $340 to support Martin every month. Later, Kevin called me. Feeling relieved after the divorce proceedings, I decided to speak with him briefly. His tone was no longer aggressive. Instead, he spoke calmly. He confessed that he believed keeping me financially dependent would prevent me from seeking a divorce. He also acknowledged his tendency to spoil his younger sister, Jane, as a misguided form of sibling love. He admitted feeling jealous of Martin, fearing he had lost me to our son. "Once I've resolved Jane's debts, I'll come back for you. Please don't remarry until then," he pleaded. However, I firmly reiterated that I no longer loved him and wouldn't reconsider our relationship. Before hanging up, I could hear him sobbing softly as he whispered, "Please be happy. Did I manage to stay strong until the end?" Discussing future plans with my parents, I decided to remain at their house until Martin grows up, and he transferred to a different nursery. Returning to my role as company president, I explained the situation to my colleagues. Later, I learned that Kevin and Jane had disclosed the divorce and their debt to their parents, resulting in their disannulment. More than the financial issues, their parents were incensed about never seeing their grandson again. Now, Kevin and Jane, once close, reside in a modest apartment, constantly blaming each other. Their actions have led to their own downfall. Today, I find happiness